Tensions are running high between China and India. This week, soldiers from the two countries brawled along the border, leaving at least 20 dead.
On June 15th, a military standoff between China and India resulted in the confirmed death of 20 Indian soldiers, and there are currently reports of at least 40 Chinese soldiers losing their lives as well. Now, it seems both countries are trying to avoid any further escalation that may take place following the bloodshed. Although the two countries have been fighting over control of the land bordering their respective countries for decades, this is the first time in over 40 years there's been a military casualty. To no surprise, the countries are blaming each other for the escalation and deaths of their own, which is leading many concerned with the possibility of what would happen if a war officially broke out. Today on Life's Biggest Questions, we're asking, what if India and China start World War III? How's it going, guys? Welcome back to LBQ. I'm your host for this one, Jared Bronstein, and today we're talking about everyone's favorite topic, hypothetical war. As always, make sure to stick around to the very end of this one for some common replies, and feel free to drop some questions down below you'd like us to cover in the future. For now, let's jump right into it. Before we start talking about details regarding this war, featuring two of the world's most populated countries, let's talk about why they've been fighting over this land for almost 70 years. Believe it or not, the area they're fighting over stemmed from another war which ended in 1962. This war stemmed from the decolonization of India, which in turn birthed Pakistan, and left an area in the Himalayas unclaimed. Throughout the 1800s, Russia, China, and Britain tried to maintain control over the Himalayas, which, as you can imagine, led to plenty of war and political discussion. Fast forward to 1947, when India and Pakistan become independent countries, and a border was established separating the two countries. However, no border was officially established separating India and China, which led to the Sino-Indian War, which took place in 1962. As you can imagine, India claimed land China felt they were entitled to, and vice versa, which led to a month-long war, eventually leading to a Chinese ceasefire. The ceasefire occurred only after China got de facto control over escalation, and that border is now referred to as the line of actual control. So it seems there's a border that separates these two countries, but where that line actually starts depends on who you ask. And because of this, there has been an ongoing conflict between the countries, claiming the other is overstepping boundaries. And even though there's been conflict, there was never any concern for a war to break out, considering how there hadn't been any military casualties along the borders in more than 40 years. On June 15th, that changed when approximately 20 Indian and over 43 Chinese casualties occurred. However, it appears the majority of the deaths are being attributed to the harsh weather conditions and not armed conflict. India's army initially claimed they suffered 3 casualties, but then claimed 17 more soldiers, I quote, who were critically injured in the line of duty at the standoff location and exposed to sub-zero temperatures in the high altitude terrain have succumbed to their injuries. Although I can't say for sure they weren't killed in hand-to-hand combat or any armed combat with the enemy, it seems the key words used here are being exposed to sub-zero temperatures. China is believed to have lost 40 plus, but they have yet to officially announce anything. Those numbers are coming from an Indian minister. What really seemed to have started this physical confrontation occurred after a June 6th agreement to de-escalate rising tensions. Chinese troops set up temporary structures after this agreement was made, which led to an Indian patrol to verify and eventually destroy the remaining Chinese property. Following the destruction of property, the Indian soldiers were confronted by a large group of Chinese soldiers, which is believed to have led to a skirmish. Reports claim the Chinese soldiers used iron rods and batons with spikes, leading to 20 Indian casualties. As you can imagine, China is claiming India is overstepping their boundaries, with Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian saying it was, I quote, a deliberate provocation and, I quote, the rights and wrongs are very clear and the responsibility rests entirely with the Indian side. India's Foreign Ministry spokesman Anurag Srivastava then cautioned China against making, I quote, exaggerated and untenable claims regarding the situation. He went on to say, I quote, while it was our expectation that this would unfold smoothly, the Chinese side departed from the consensus to respect the line of actual control, LAC, in the Galwan Valley. Both sides suffered casualties that could have been avoided had the agreement at the higher level been scrupulously followed by the Chinese side. Given its responsible approach to border management, India is very clear that all its activities are always within the Indian side of the LAC. We expect the same of the Chinese side. We remain firmly convinced of the need for the maintenance of peace and tranquility in the border areas and the resolution of differences through dialogue. At the same time, we are also strongly committed to ensuring India's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So as of now, both sides are just pointing the finger at each other, which is usually the case when it comes to war. And even though the two sides are expected to work things out, at least to the point that they avoid any further conflict and casualties, some are still concerned this may blow up into something much bigger than a border dispute. The UN is now urging both sides to, I quote, exercise maximum restraint, and it's quite clear the world is eagerly awaiting to see how this one plays out, with hopes that a World War III isn't drawing near. And although it likely won't get to that point, Never say never. So what would happen, hypothetically, if things did go south and a war officially broke out between these two mega countries? Well, one thing is for sure, nukes wouldn't be involved. Considering how the two countries literally border each other, the second one launches a nuke at the other, both countries turn into a radiation-filled Mad Max looking landscape. And although both sides are nuclear armed, it doesn't mean they're going to necessarily flex that muscle anytime soon. Aside from this, the actual area where the two countries are fighting is not only inhabitable, but extremely difficult to gain control over. It's in the rocky terrains in the mountains, and with the altitude sickness that would lead to debilitating headaches and nausea, there wouldn't be much of a fight taking place at all. Yet if somehow some way it was declared that an official war were to break out, things wouldn't bode well for either side. It's no secret that when push comes to shove, the US and their allies would be siding with India, while Russia would possibly side with China. However, Russia may not even join the war in the first place, as they may not want to get involved in a conflict that they feel they don't need to be a part of. The reality is, no country would want to allow things to escalate to the point that they would need to be called in for support. So it's possible that the war is short-lived, with some of the most powerful countries showing support and solidarity for India in hopes that China just backs off. But as we know, it likely wouldn't be so simple, as other countries could see this as an opportune time to either gain advantages with other countries from a defensive or economical standpoint. Although China is believed to have a strong army, in comparison to the countries that would side with India, which includes the United States, Japan, as well as the UK and the majority of Europe, well, it doesn't seem this would be much of a war. Yet we can't just look at or discuss factors such as how powerful an army is, because war affects more than just those going to fight the good fight. The reality is, India and China going to war would be a huge blow to both economies, especially if other countries got involved as well. With the recent events that have occurred, Indian citizens have actually been calling for a boycott of Chinese products, which would be costly for both sides. More specifically, the Confederation of All Indian Trades, CAIT, which is believed to represent upwards of 70 million trades, has asked government officials to support the boycott of Chinese goods and cancel any government contracts made with Chinese manufacturers. Praveen Khandelwal, the National General Secretary at CAIT, wrote a letter to some Indian officials claiming, I quote, "The entire nation is filled with extreme anger and intensity to give a strong benefiting response to China, not only militarily, but also economically." From an economic standpoint, India imports a lot more to China than they export. A disruption in relations could lead to a serious blow to India, who rely heavily on Chinese imports. As we know, the United States also relies heavily on Chinese imports, but considering how the US also makes up for more than 16% of China's total exports, any disruptions between the countries would take a toll on everyone. Following the conflict, people in India have taken to social media to show their outrage, with many breaking their Chinese-made phones and products. However, as Shyam Saran, former Indian Foreign Secretary, put it, the country should avoid any knee-jerk reactions. I quote, "We should avoid any knee-jerk reactions. China is the world's second largest economy, its largest trading nation, and is fully integrated in a dense network of regional and global supply chains. There is not only direct trade with China, but a large number of international vendors supply Chinese-made components to our industries. It would be virtually impossible in the near or medium term to find alternative producers and suppliers. Any demands for a blanket ban on Chinese goods may end up hurting India more than China, but it is both necessary and timely to designate sensitive industries and segments of our economy where Chinese presence may have adverse security implications." So to wrap up, if a war broke out, it likely wouldn't last too long. I didn't even touch on the fact that we're still dealing with a pandemic, and that in itself makes war much more complicated. But given what we know, it'd be incredibly tough for India to immediately find substitutions for all the imports they currently get from China. Aside from the pandemic also negatively affecting the majority of the world, other countries are currently looking to rebuild their economies and find ways to balance out the loss they'll be taking for years to come due to COVID. So the last thing they would want to be involved in is a world war. And that does it for this one, guys. As always, let us know your thoughts below, and feel free to drop some other questions you'd like us to answer. For now, let's reply to some comments from the video. How does Mr. Beast have so much money? MD Hussein said, "Fun fact, Mr. Beast stated in a podcast that he didn't buy a nice car for himself because he couldn't afford to buy everyone on his team nice cars by that time. And he wasn't a fan of the idea of just buying a nice car for himself while his friends drive normal cars." That's fair. Seems like a nice, genuine guy. Like, at the end of the day, he doesn't seem like one just to flaunt his money and just tell everybody how much more he has. He just seems like a pretty level-headed guy, which is nice to see. Carl Play said, "No one. Bots. Don't lie, who else is a fan of life's biggest questions?" I actually hate these bots so much. Like, on all social media, like, I'll just be on an Instagram page and I'll just go to the comments and I'll just see like a random page with a picture of a girl in like lingerie and they're following like 1,800 people and they have 4 followers, and it's like, do you think I'm pretty? Like, dude, how fake can you be? Radioactive Bullet said, "Mr. Beast has so much money because Mr. Beast gave him money for charity." Sure, if you want to, yeah, okay. Anyways, guys, that's it for this one. I've been your host, Jared Bronstein. You guys have been watching LBQ, and we'll see you in the next one.